And good morning. We're going to go ahead and start the second part of our story when the war is over. Remember, we talked yesterday about the orphanage and how the boys were so unruly, and that Zoli had come in to become the headmaster because he had been thrown out of his own home for choosing to follow Christ. All right, so here's some words that we may run across. This one, the bedroom looked messy with clothes and toys strewn all over. Strewn is a word that means just thrown about. So it was a messy room. Things were just thrown about. As the enemy came closer, the soldiers started retreating from their position. Retreating means turning away, going back. Like if you think about in the army or something and they go in for a battle and then they start to retreat, that means they're getting beat, so they're going to go back. Hearing the sad news, the girl's face looked sober. Sober has a few different meanings, but in this sentence, it means serious or sad. The soldiers warned families to evacuate the city and go to a safer place. Evacuate means to leave. The older sister gingerly carried the special glass dish. What do you think the word gingerly means in that sentence? Carefully and softly. Okay, let's look at page 206 in your reader book. Now there's a head note at the very top. It says 7 years later, Zoli is still running the orphanage. He is married now with 2 sons. Throughout World War II, Zoli has been an officer in the reserve army. And there's a picture of he and his wife on their wedding day. That's Zoli and Ilona, I think is her name. And there's another picture of her down on the left-hand side of the page before she was married. All right, so 7 years has passed since he came there. Now I want you to listen to the changes that have taken place over the course of these 7 years, okay? Follow along with me as I read. Now this is April 1944, so this is 7 years later. It says, riding out World War II. A major to see you, sir. I nodded and stood up. My desk was strewn with papers, by which I was trying to stretch short rations and medicine further than they would go. The major was Bootblack, my friend from school days. I saluted the rank and took the hand of my friend. Bootblack said, "How's Ilona and Henrik?" "They're well." I motioned to a chair. "Henrik was a brother since you were here has a brother since you were here last, Coleman." He smiled widely and shook my hand again. Then he sat down, and I followed his lead. He passed his hand over his mouth and then dropped his hands, gripping his knees. "I am here officially to order you to take the reserves out of the Comorom immediately." "The war is over then?" He sighed. "The Germans are retreating. The Russians are advancing. They will occupy Hungary within the week." "Where do we go?" "Try to get the supply unit west to Austria or Germany. Take what supplies you can. Don't leave anything for the Russians. Burn stuff if you have to." "How long do I have to move out?" 3 days. Advise the citizens to get out as well. But you can't take the time to force them." He was standing again. "Can I take Ilona with me?" "Your privilege, Zoli. Do what you think best there. Move at night as much as you can. The Russian airplanes are always overhead." Ilona's face was white. She held Coleman asleep in her arms. "Henrik," I said, "come sit down." He came and stood by his mother. The boys were there, waiting with sober faces. Gab and 8 others had already left to join the army, but 21 were still in my charge. "We have to evacuate the city," I told them. "I have to go with the reserves, but Pastor Toth will be here in the morning to take you with him or find you a place to stay." A little boy about 8 put his head on his knees and sobbed. Ilona went to sit beside him and stroked his hair. "Any of you who are 16, I hesitated and then went on, "can do what you will." "Can't we go with you, Zoli, Bisset?" said Donnie. I shook my head. "I'm sorry I can't take you." He looked as though he might cry as well. "I love you boys, but God loves you more, and I must trust Him to look after you. I want you to trust Him too." "Where are we?" Henrik asked. He sat in front of the wagon. I reined Alexander near. Somewhere west of Bratislava, I think, I said. We made such little headway, traveling slowly in the dark, hiding in the woods all day. 2 months of this dodging, and still no Hungarian fighting units had appeared. I held Alexander in and let the next wagon come abreast of me. The driver said, "Yes, sir? I'm going to take a blanket off the wagon and ride to the farm over there and see if I can make a trade for our breakfast." He nodded. "Keep moving. I'll catch up with you." The farmer's wife gladly parted with some eggs and milk for the heavy wool blanket. It hardly would feed 27 men in my family, but it was the best meal I could make. There was another farmhouse in the distance. I could still see the wagons to the left. I turned Alexander to the house. A stout woman there looked me up and down. "What do you want with eggs?" she said. "I have chickens myself." "Please," I said, "I have children with me." "No soldier has children with him." "If I bring my son here, will you believe me?" "I might." I looked at the sky. The sun was nearly full up. My assistant, Pataki, took the eggs gingerly, and then the milk. I reached for Henrik, and he came flying. He took his place in front of me and grabbed into the mane. "Let's go, Papa." "Pull off that woods over there," I told Pataki. "We won't be long." Alexander snorted to a halt in the farmyard. The woman leaned out the window. "Well, I'll be," she said. "Hello," said Henrik. His blond hair shone in the early sun. "Hello yourself." He laughed. "Papa and I rode over from the wagon. Alexander is one good horse." She came out of the house, then went up to Henrik. She looked at me. "I might have some extra around here," she said. She returned with a sack of bread and vegetables and cheese. I offered her money. What good does that do anybody? Just see this little one gets out of this. And that's all the part for today. So let's ask a couple of questions right quick just to make sure we're understanding what's going on. All right, so who was it that came to see Zoli that brought him the bad news? An old school friend, Bootblack. What news did he bring? That Zoli had to get everybody out of there. Everybody, because the Russians were coming. Why is Bootblack's official news a serious matter? They didn't want to get taken over by the Russians, and so that was very serious. So how will this situation affect the boys at the orphanage? They'll have to leave, and they won't be able to be under Zoli's care anymore. Remember, Pastor Toth was coming to take care of the boys that were there, and Gab and the older boys, because it had been 7 years, were already gone, and they were in the reserve army. What would you feel if you were a child in that orphanage right now? Would you feel scared? I would. Whom does Zoli encourage the boys to trust? He encouraged them to trust in God. How long have Zoli's family in the reserves been traveling? It says 2 months. It says that on page 208. How does Zoli feed the soldiers and his family? He trades items for different food items. Okay, and the last page, 209. What bold idea does Zoli use to get more food? He has to bring his little boy over there so the woman, because the woman doesn't believe that he's got little ones, and he has to bring his boy over there so that she can see that, and she'll give him food, and she wants that little boy to get out of there because she doesn't want him to get hurt. Okay, so let's look at our work text page today. Now we're actually going to skip the work text page that was for today. It's page 84, and it's just simply a page that goes over dividing words into syllables, and we're going to skip that, and we're just going to do page 85 today in your work text. Now, this is going to be for words, kind of like definitions. Now it says each loaf of bread contains a word from the story, and it even has the page number on which you can find that word. Match the word to its definition by writing the correct letter in the milk bottle. Then write a sentence explaining how the word relates to the story. The first one's already done. So the first word is clamor, and that was found on page 201 in the reader. So they chose B, which is loud shouting and hubbub. Okay, that's what that means. And the sentence that they wrote that goes with the story, the boys made a lot of clamor at breakfast. And your sentence could be different. Now, you're not going to copy a sentence from the book. You're just going to write a sentence using that word like it relates to the story. So let me help you with the next one. And then I'm going to have you do the last 4 by yourself. So nanny is the next word, and it's found on page 200. So which letter up here do you think would have the definition for nanny? Did you choose A? Because a children's nurse would be a nanny. So in the milk bottle beside the bread, you're going to put the letter A. Okay, so now what sentence could you write with the word nanny that would kind of go along with the story? You could say something like, the nanny worked at the orphanage, or the nanny took care of the boys at the orphanage, or something like that. Just something that goes along with the story, okay? Now, I'm not going to grade this page, but I want to see the last 4 that you do on your own, okay? All right, and that will be all for today.